The PTB experience is never complete unless there's one controversial change. Normally, any controversial changes involve a perk or a map. However, the controversial change this time around has nothing to do with the game's overall balance, but instead a cosmetic change. Yes, I am referring to the face rework that Nancy received. As a part-time Nancy main, I naturally feel inclined to share my thoughts on this rework. I only review this change because I care. I don't want to see Nancy's one chance at a rework be fumbled. This topic is not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. It's simply a noteworthy change to a somewhat popular licensed character. Along with this, I should also note that there have been theories floating around that DBD lost the likeness for Nancy, which could be used as a way to explain any differences. I don't believe this is true whatsoever. I sincerely think this redesign was just botched a little and that some small corrections are all that's needed. The short version of my opinion is that this rework sort of turned Nancy into a different character, which I recognize is not the intention when doing character reworks. However, there was at least one positive change that I can commend. But here's the thing. I've always viewed DBD's version of Nancy to be fairly accurate to the likeness of Nancy's actress Natalia Dyer, with only certain angles or locomotions in game not doing the character model justice. For example, DBD's version of Nancy can occasionally be found looking kind of grumpy, but I've never personally had a problem with it. The general perception of the pre-PTB version of Nancy has always been a bit mixed, with people referencing Steve as being a more accurate reflection of the actor Joe Keery. And I think as time passed and DBD started improving some aspects of other characters, a clamoring for a Nancy rework started to grow. How sizable the demand actually was cannot be fully measured, but I recognize that there were players asking for a rework of some kind. So between the mixed opinions on the accuracy of the character model and this PTB being almost exclusively focused on Stranger Things, the chances of Nancy receiving a cosmetic refresh in this patch were high. But even with this forward thinking, my initial reaction to Nancy's rework was of pure disbelief. I'm genuinely shocked at how different the PTB version of Nancy looks from the current version on live servers. She honestly looks like a different character. I've seen some discourse saying that she looks much better and is much more accurate, but I'm just not seeing it. The only angle that sort of does this new version justice is the side profile. From that viewpoint, I can see what they were trying to go for, but that's just one angle. Now, I don't pretend to know anything about character modeling in video games. My art skills alone disqualify me from being overly critical or nitpicky about character designs. I'm merely thankful that people with better art skills exist and can utilize those skills for amazing creative endeavors for things like video games. But I do believe it's important to provide feedback for any changes, as there's little to no chance for any additional adjustments unless feedback is given right now. So I did a quick comparison of the PTB version of Nancy with her actress from the show and with the Nancy currently on live servers. I've done my best to highlight why I believe the PTB version of Nancy doesn't look as good as it could be. The obvious disclaimer here is that this is my own subjective opinion, so if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. The first part that looked off to me is that the PTB version of Nancy doesn't have as sharp of a jawline. This is probably the most distinguishable difference. Connected to this are her cheeks, which also look a bit off. Perhaps it's just because of the way the jawline is structured, but even then, it just emphasizes how the jawline is not as accurate. In addition to this, the eyes in the PTB version, and maybe even the eyebrows, look off as well. I can't pinpoint if it's the size of her eyes or if it's just the way her eyelashes look, but something about the eyes is not correct. Now, there is one positive part of the rework that I alluded to earlier, and that has to do with her hair. It actually looks a lot more accurate in the PTB version, so props to that part of the redesign. It's a big improvement. However, this one positive isn't enough to change my opinion on the entire rework, though I'm hopeful that with only a few slight adjustments, the post-PTB version of Nancy will be immensely better. It certainly doesn't take a Nancy main of any kind to recognize why this change is getting mixed reactions. Whenever a beloved character gets a remodel, there's always a risk of a poor reception. Even in a scenario where the original version of a character is universally agreed as needing a rework, there will always be a small percentage of people who end up preferring the original version no matter what. But I don't believe that's the scenario that's happening with this rework, as I've seen a lot of mixed opinions since the PTB launched. If I had to give an estimate, I would say at least 60% of the reaction to this Nancy rework has been negative, with the positive reception mostly resulting from giving the PTB version a few days to settle in. And I can honestly say I've given the PTB version a few days to settle in, and my opinion hasn't changed. The PTB version of Nancy simply looks like a different character to me. Now, obviously, this issue is not the end of the world by any means, but in order to have any chance of this remodel getting some additional adjustments, Now is the best time to provide feedback and put any opinions out there. And again, I am hopeful that with enough feedback, the devs will go back in and make some more adjustments. I would genuinely be surprised if no adjustments were made post PTB, especially given some of the feedback I've seen. This PTB also does not contain that many issues this time around, so some extra time dedicated to small details like this rework could go a long way. That's all I have for now. Thanks for watching.